Good Wednesday evening, everybody. We are live. This is Biscuits and SEC Live. It is our fifth show now. We're excited to have you guys on with us and looking forward to talking a lot of ball tonight. Before we get started, remember to follow us on all of our social platforms. It's at Biscuits and SEC. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at that handle. And make sure, as you can see down below, sign up for the Biscuits and SEC newsletter, which we write Monday and Friday. I write it on Monday. Hammer writes it on Friday. And we talk about SEC football. We got SEC basketball season coming up, SEC baseball as well. That's coming up here fairly soon early in the next year. And so we talk all things SEC. We get you caught up on all the injury reports, talk about what's coming up the next week for football, talk about a bunch of commitments, SEC shorts, all the fun stuff. So be sure to do that as well. And be sure to hit the notification bell and to subscribe on our YouTube channel. We're trying to grow that thing as well. So, Hammer, how are we doing on this Wednesday night?
Doing great. It was another awesome weekend across the SEC, across college football. So doing really well. Excited to jump in and talk about everything that we saw and what we're looking forward to in Week 10.
Yeah, without a doubt. It was another fun week. Not as many upsets as we've seen before. There were a couple scares across college football, a couple scares in the SEC, but we can get right into it because we've gone over about to an hour 20 for our last couple shows. So we need to tighten it up a little bit. But for Week 9, really the big story coming out was A&M over LSU and how that game played out, how it was the tale of two halves. You had Marcel Reed come in the second half and go on 5 straight scoring drives. So there's a lot to really dissect in this game. So what were your thoughts on the main game of Week 9?
Yeah, like you just alluded to, it really was a tale of two halves, right? So it kind of reminded me of that meme now that's kind of become famous of I think it was just a high school kid post-game interview where he's like, they had us in the first half, not going to lie. Because LSU had A&M in the first half, obviously. Connor Wigman came out, just did not look sharp. As a lot of people have said, including Coach Elko, not all of that was on him, right? LSU was doing a great job of getting pressure. His receivers really were not getting very good separation. Again, I think credit to the LSU defense there. But he also missed a couple throws. He just never looked comfortable back there. You and I obviously were watching this game, talking about it. He kind of had happy feet. If there was a guy open, he was just not looking. He just never looked comfortable. He looked very skittish in the pocket, and I think the pressure was getting to him. So it all flipped when they made that move. I think, leading up to the point where Reed got into the game, obviously the A&M defense had kind of buckled down. Even just to start the second half, it looked like they had made a few adjustments that were going to be helpful. But then obviously you get the interception you get pressure on Nussmeier. He flushes the pocket, throws up just a ill-advised throw, and BJ Mays comes down with the pick and takes it back to the LSU 8-yard line. And then Reed comes in the game. And from there, it was just, like you said, 5 straight drives, just pow, 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 4 straight touchdowns, then the field goal to close. And I mean, I think it just speaks to what we always talk about. It's a 4-quarter game. It's a 60-minute game. And A&M, despite offensively not having a good first half, not having a good first 2 drives to start the second half with Wigman, they've got quarterback depth, and Marcel Reed came in and he was just ready. He answered the bell, and they ran it down LSU's throat the entire second half.
Yeah, it was obvious, and Brian Kelly talked about this in the post-game press conference. But he said, if I was A&M, if I was a team, I'd have had a running quarterback against us as well. And that was obvious once Marcel Reed came in. There was a lot I think you could take away from this game. One of the main things I took away from A&M's perspective is that at this point, it's just obvious that Connor Wigman is not going to be the guy going forward. I think we can talk about Connor Wigman versus Marcel Reed. I still happen to believe, and as an Aggie, and you can see Hammer got his Aggie hat on. We're Aggies. we love covering the SEC. We love talking about all teams in the SEC, but we did graduate from A&M. So we focus on them a lot. And Connor Weigman still has a ton of talent. I really do believe that. I've seen a lot of it. I've seen every game he's played. I've watched him in the Miami game. I watched him a couple years ago against LSU as a freshman, go off against them, throwing the ball. I think he's got a lot of talent. However, it just hasn't been the same since his injury. His clock seems sped up in the pocket. He seems like he's dancing. Like you said, he's got happy feet. And he's just not making good decisions. I mean, there was one play in the game where he finally had a chance to potentially scramble. And he had 30 yards of green space in front of him to the left, and he cut back to the right and went straight into an LSU defensive lineman and got like a 3-yard gain. So, or LSU defensive lineman. So something's up with that. The other piece of it is I think Colin Klein's offense, obviously, after what we just saw, fits much better with Marcel Reed than it does with Connor Weigman. So it feels like they were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole with Weigman and in Colin Klein's offense. And now you've seen what Marcel Reed can do. We've seen it over a couple of games. We saw it now against LSU. I think what's going to be interesting going forward for them is what is Marcel Reed is going to have to develop as well as a passer. Teams are going to key in on the run. They're going to try to stop the run. They're going to load the box to stop that aspect of A&M's game. So can Marcel Reed going forward develop in the passing game enough to where he's a threat in both? So that was a big thing for me. And the other thing was A&M's defense, the tale of two halves. The Elko second half adjustments are famed. The Aggies know him well from his time when he was coaching as DC under Jimbo Fisher. And now we're seeing it as he's the head coach. He makes some of the best second half adjustments of anyone in college football. And we saw that against LSU, and we saw the offensive, explosion and output that it put out, but it also happened on defense. There were 0 turnovers in the first half. LSU had 0 rushing yards in the second half and 3 turnovers, because if you throw it 50 times a game at some point, especially if you're running for your life, it's probably going to end very badly for you. And that's why you had 3 Garrett Nussmeier turnovers. So really awesome game to watch. The other, final thing I will say, because I'm filibustering here, is Le'Veon Moss. Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels, as well as Marcel Reed in that run game, absolutely ran it down LSU's throat. Somewhat in the first half, but absolutely in the second half. And it was fun to see those guys get going.
Yeah, I before we move on, that is one thing I wanted to hit on, aside from, Marcel Reed or really any of the not background, but just anything in this game. I think there's a lot of things you can focus on, but to me, it comes down to, as it often does in the SEC, it's trench play. Who wins the trenches? And A&M ran for 242 yards on 49 carries. LSU ran for 24 yards on 23 carries. They could not run the ball in A&M. They didn't try to run the ball in A&M. And like you said, if your quarterback's throwing the ball 50 times, I mean, I don't care how good you are, like, there's a good chance you're going to start throwing some interceptions. And that just came back to bite him. I mean, look, I think if, for LSU, what they would have to look back on in this game, at least if I was a Tiger fan or coach, is like, okay, we've seen Garrett Nussmeier enough at this point. I think everybody feels like he's probably the best or one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. But throwing the ball 50 times a game is not his, it's not best for him. It's not best for our team. We've got to figure out a way to run the ball. And I think, look, whether it's, to avoid the turnovers or just to burn some clock, get your defense off the field, because they're getting gashed every time the Aggies have the ball, is, man, we got to be able to rip off 3 and 4 yard runs just to possess the ball, take some pressure off of Nussmeier. And LSU, honestly, if they could have run for 125 to 150 yards, probably wins this game, because Nussmeier probably throws it 30 or 35 times. He might throw 1 pick, but they couldn't. The A&M defensive line and front 7 buckled down. They started to get pressure on Nussmeier. They got home a couple times. They sacked him a few times. So again, like we said, it comes down a lot of times in this league to the trenches, and A&M dominated in the trenches in this game.
I thought I was done with this game, but final thing I'll say on this, got to give a shout out to the Kyle Field crowd. It was absolutely crazy all night. And it actually led to multiple penalties and huge mistakes for LSU. I think way it might have led to those interceptions from Garrett Nussmeier. Hard to hear all night. 5 start penalties for LSU, as well as that botched field goal where the long snapper obviously could not hear, thought he heard the count, and just snapped it way before the holder was even ready. The holder wasn't even looking at it.
Right.
So Kyle Field crowd was incredible. It was an awesome atmosphere. Really great to watch it on ABC on the primetime game. So, all right, that's enough on that one. Let's go to quickly. We can touch on this one. Texas at Vanderbilt. Texas was, I believe, an 18.5-point favorite, and they came nowhere close to covering that spread. So, what did you think about this game?
Yeah, this was an interesting game. The 3-point game at the end, it never really felt like in watching this that Texas was in danger of losing, honestly, until the end, right? Okay, Vanderbilt punches it in. They've got a chance with the onside. But until then, Texas was leading. What I took away from it is they just couldn't pull away. And the whole Quinn Ewers Arch thing, I think, look, Arch didn't see the field, so it's clear which direction Sark is going. I think that's probably the right direction in sticking with Ewers, but I mean, he threw another 2 interceptions. One of them was a batted pass at the line of scrimmage that went up in the air. So not totally his fault, but also, don't get your ball batted by a defensive lineman at the line of scrimmage. And the other thing I took away, again, it's more, my takeaway is just, I think the Texas offense that we thought was so good and almost, borderline invincible until that Georgia game has really slowed down. So Georgia exposing them is one thing, but Vanderbilt, first of all, they hold them to 27 points. They sacked Quinn Ewers 4 times. They had 9 tackles for loss, and Texas only averaged 3.3 yards on the ground. So if I'm Texas, staff and fans, I'm a little nervous. Their schedule is not a murderer's row to finish the year, but Texas has national championship aspirations, right? And if you're going into a playoff game, you got to be able to run the ball. You got to, an SEC title game, the game at Kyle Field, like they're going to have games ahead of them where they're going to need to run the ball. And I don't know if it's the offensive line is not quite what they were cracked up to be, right? Everybody thought they were so good before the Georgia game. They're very talented, but perhaps they're not quite as good as we thought. Or it could be the injuries are coming back to bite them, right? They lost 2 running backs before the season started, and CJ Baxter, and can't remember the other fellow's name, but Baxter, of course, was supposed to start for them. And so, they're relying on backup running backs, and 3.3 yards a carry. I know Vanderbilt has improved, but it's still Vanderbilt, and you have multiple NFL players on the Texas offensive line. So to average 3.3 yards a carry, to turn the ball over twice, to allow 4 sacks, I didn't think it was a very clean game. But ultimately, you get the win, you move on, and you live to fight another day. So that was my takeaway, though. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, there's not much more to add for me. I will say, a lot of talk about Texas there, which the spotlight should obviously be on them since they're, a top 5 team or whatever they're ranked right now. I think they're still in the top 5 or top 10 at least.
Yeah, I don't know what the AP's got them at.
Yeah, 6 or so. But I mean, we should talk about Vanderbilt. Like, Vanderbilt is playing everyone close this year. It does not matter who you are. They are not scared of anybody. The Diego Pavia show rolls on. He had a tougher game against Texas this week, but he still has them in the game right up until the end, and they're driving the field to potentially tie or win the game. And it's just incredible, I would say, what Clark Lee has done with the overhaul of Vanderbilt in just 1 year, from where they were last year to where they are this year. It's been really fun to watch, and I'll give credit to the Vanderbilt students. They filled the student section last week. That's awesome. There was a lot of Texas fans there, if you look at the pictures, but there was a ton of Vanderbilt fans as well. There was a lot of students as well. So it's starting to catch on out there in Nashville. I hope that continues, and we'll get to the game later in the show. But watch out, Diego Pavia has already got a win in Jordan-Hare, so maybe he's got another one in him.
I know, yeah. We'll touch on it later, but that's a good look ahead. Moving on, just more games from week 9. Mizzou gets pummeled by Bama, 34-0. Any thoughts on that? I mean, I don't know. That was a pretty tough game to watch, if I'm being honest. So I'll let you take that one, and I may add a little bit, but I don't have too much to say on it.
I've got, I guess, 3 quick things on it. First of all, Mizzou is not a great football team this year. They're just not. And without Brady Cook, they are completely lost. Drew Pine has been playing college football now for 4 or 5 years, and he still just does not look good. 3 picks against Alabama. It was really ugly. So that's my first takeaway. My second takeaway is that kind of on the back of that, Mizzou had a ton of returners this year, which is why everybody was excited to see them and say, okay, well, maybe this team really does have a shot at the playoff. Maybe this team is a top 10 team. I think they rose as high as, I think, number 6 at one point in the polls, or number 7. So people were excited about that because of all of that returning talent. And a lot of it was on offense. You had a ton of returning talent on offense. The one major piece they lost was Cody Schrader, which seems to be potentially coming back to haunt them. But the main takeaway that I've got is that Mizzou lost key pieces on that defense. They lost Chris Abrams-Drain. They lost another piece in the sector, Ennis Rakestraw.
Yeah.
They lost Rakestraw. They lost their starting safety. They lost Tyron Hopper. They lost Darius Robinson. So they lost multiple really key pieces from that defense last year, and that's really haunting them this year. My final quick takeaway on the Alabama side is, if I'm an Alabama fan, I'm excited about this. It was a get-right game, 34-0. You can never be unhappy about that. However, you walked into the locker room 13-0. This was not really an easy game. If I'm a Tide fan, I'm happy with the outcome, but I'm still a little uneasy with where this team is. They don't look – if the old Alabama team, that would have been 35-0 at halftime. And we would have been talking about a 42-0, 45-0, 45-7 type of game under Nick Saban over the last decade plus. So I'm still a little uneasy if I'm a Tide fan. However, it's win and move on. We're still got everything in front of us. We only got 2 losses. Backs are against the rope. We still got a lot to look forward to if we play right.
Yeah, real quick. Only 2 thoughts for me really on that game. First of all, on the Bama side, offensively, they finally got some production out of their running backs. They ran for 271 yards and 4 touchdowns between Justice Haynes, Jam Miller, and Jalen Milroe. And Milroe, I can't remember the exact breakdown, but he was not the leading rusher. So they actually got some yardage on the ground with their running backs, which I think is a welcome sign for the Alabama offense, Tide fans, that staff. And then on the Missouri side, like you said, they're just not a very good team this year. Without Brady Cook, they're really hamstrung. However, Brady Cook has played in every game except this one. And in their games against Power 4 now opponents, they have been outscored. They're 3-2 overall because they beat Vandy, they beat Boston College, and they beat Auburn. But they have been outscored in those games by 52 points combined because they lost to 31 to A&M and 34 to Alabama. So I think, as you said, they're just not a very good team this season. And I think they kind of are what they are. And anytime they go up against somebody, like an Alabama or an A&M who's on a little bit different level, I think they're going to get their clocks cleaned as they did on Saturday.
I would say so. I would agree with that. So next up on the slate, we had Oklahoma and Ole Miss. And Ole Miss wasn't able to cover the spread in this game, but they did do a lot of good things in Oxford. So what were your takeaways from this game?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have a ton from Ole Miss. I wanted to see a little more out of their offense in this game coming off of a bye week. But Oklahoma does have a solid defense, so I don't want to read too much into it. I still think Ole Miss is a little – they just can't quite get going on offense. I think their run game is still struggling. I don't think they ran the ball super effectively in this one. But it's kind of weird to say, because this is not what we think of when we think of Ole Miss, but they just might be a defensive team this year. Oklahoma's offense is not good, so I don't want to give them too much credit for holding a bad Sooners offense to 14 points, but they sacked Jackson Arnold 10 times and had 15 tackles for loss. And that is, not the first time their defensive line has really wreaked havoc on an opponent. So from the Ole Miss side, I think I want to see a little more from their offense. I'm looking at it now. They only managed 69 yards rushing on 31 carries, and they also gave up 9 tackles for loss to Oklahoma. So the offensive line is not really gelling yet, and we're getting pretty damn late to gel, but they haven't gelled up to this point for Ole Miss. But like I said, defensively, they look great. So they might just be a more, defense-heavy team this year, and ultimately, you get a win, and they likely have to win out to keep their playoff hopes and preseason hopes alive, the expectations coming into the year. So you get a win by double digits. So nothing too alarming from Ole Miss.
Yeah, not much to add on this one. I think the story is the same for Oklahoma. Offense is bad. Offensive line is Swiss cheese. Probably moved on from Jackson Arnold too soon. Doesn't seem like this has been Jackson Arnold's fault. And now you've hurt that kid's confidence. And if you're reading tea leaves, wouldn't be surprised at all if he transfers in the offseason, because likely they're going to come into camp and have a quarterback competition. And I don't know that he has trust in the coaches anymore after how they pulled him early in the year against Tennessee. So other than that, though, Ole Miss on the defensive side, it was an awesome performance. Also love to see the J.J. Pegues big man TD. That was a whole lot of fun to watch. And I love that Lane Kiffin is bringing back the refrigerator Perry goal line offense. So that was a lot of fun. So I think we can move on again so we can get through these games quick, because we've got some bigger things to cover in our second segment. So Arkansas against Mississippi State. Anything you want to touch on there?
I'll be brief. We don't need to spend a ton of time on it. All I will say is I was disappointed in Mississippi State. I thought they had a little bit of something going. They played Georgia tight. They played A&M tight. And I guess they just ran out of gas here because Bobby Petrino was in his bag. That was kind of the offensive game from Arkansas that I was hoping to see the week prior against LSU. And we did not see it, but they brought it out for Mississippi State and just took them behind the woodshed. That was a really rough game if you're Mississippi State. Like I said, you kind of felt like you've been building, and Arkansas just came in there and absolutely whipped them. So very good win for Arkansas, I think, in what was a tricky spot, as we, again, just saw A&M and Georgia struggle there. So to go into Starkville and get a win like that, I think that was big for Pittman and that team coming off of a really bad loss to LSU. So good for Arkansas to get off the mat, and just a tough game for Mississippi State.
Yeah, without a doubt. To me, this one was Good Morning Vietnam. That was Bobby Petrino throwing some napalm out there on Mississippi State. It was it was due at some point this year, except for Arkansas Pine Bluff at the start of the year where they hung 70 on them. But against an actual, decent team, and I didn't know if it was going to happen against an SEC team, but Mississippi State's as good as any to have it happen against. Bobby Petrino was going to, lay the hammer on somebody, and it was this week. So 58-25, not much more to add on this one. I think Mississippi State probably does not get an SEC win, barring some insanity in the Egg Bowl, which is always possible. But that, I think, was their best chance to get a win, and doesn't look like they're going to get it. So finally on the slate from last week was Auburn and Kentucky. Auburn wins 24-10 in Lexington at night. So there's a whole lot that you could probably talk about in this game. Mark Stoops, what's going on with that? What's the feeling in Lexington from Kentucky fans? Auburn gets their first SEC win, which is great. It's on the road. And then also another thing to touch on is Jarquez Hunter. People have been screaming it from the rooftops on Toomer's Corner. People have been screaming it from the rooftops across the country for Auburn fans. So where the heck has Jarquez Hunter been? Well, they figured it out last night, on Saturday night. Hugh Freeze finally handed him the ball, and he went off. So what were your takeaways up from this one?
Pretty much just that. I think he finally gave the ball to Jarquez Hunter. Jarquez had 23 carries, 278 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So when Hugh Freeze, leading into that game during one of his pressers last week, said he was, what did he say? I'm done messing around, or it's time to get serious, whatever he said, which was ridiculous. I guess he just meant, it's time to actually do the one thing that everybody with eyeballs has known I should be doing all year, and that's give the ball to Jarquez Hunter. So he decided to do that. Voila, they won. On the Kentucky side, man, I don't know. They almost they're on give up watch to me, because here you got their schedule here, right? They've now lost 3 games in a row. The last 2 were really pretty bad losses. I mean, you go up 10-0 on Auburn at home at night and lose 24-10. That's rough. And they got a trip to Neyland this weekend at night. They get I don't even know who that M is, McNeese or something, maybe Murray State.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then they go to Texas, and then they host Louisville, who I would say they should be able to beat Louisville, but you never know. It's a rivalry game, and Kentucky is not good this year. So that's a team like, I don't have a ton to say on them other than they're on quit watch for me, because it kind of felt like they quit in this ball game. And the way Mark Stoops is talking to the media, the things he is saying, it doesn't seem like he's got really a grasp on this team and what's going on. So they are in danger to me of missing a bowl game, and I'm a little bit worried about what's going on in Lexington.
Yeah, I am as well. They are staring 4-8 or 5-7 dead in the face. And that is not where Kentucky fans thought they would be this year. That's not at all where this team wants to be. It's not at all where Mark Stoops wants to be. And like you said, that's obvious from his post-game press conferences. He is obviously very flustered with where this team is at right now, and very frustrated. And I kind of don't know where it goes from here. I mean, he's had these kind of dips, every once in a while during his tenure at Kentucky. And but I think that Kentucky fans and most folks in the Bluegrass State thought that we'd kind of reached a level where 8-4, 7-5 was the bad year, not 5-7, not 4-8, like, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that sort of thing. So especially losing in Lexington at night like that, and especially how they played early in the year. The South Carolina game seemed like an anomaly at the time. Then they went to, they had Georgia come to Lexington. They have Georgia on the ropes. 13-12 is what they end up losing. And then the game that next week, I'm forgetting who they played that next week. It was somebody, let me see.
Ole Miss.
Yeah,
Ohio.
Ohio. Right. They crush Ohio, but then you have Ole Miss, and you got them on the ropes too. You take it to them at Oxford. And play ball control, take it to them maybe a little bit too strong, but you play ball control and you end up winning that game and get a couple breaks to go your way. But now, it does not look good. Not a ton to say on the Auburn side, except Jarquez Hunter, right? Like he looks like G.I. Joe. To me, with doing all the, the muscle pictures and all that stuff.
Who was the old NFL guy that I don't think he liked the nickname, but people started calling him the muscle hamster. Does that ring a bell? Do you know who I'm talking about?
No, I don't, but they should bring that back to Jarquez Hunter, because
that's what he reminds me of.
Yeah, he looks like Mighty Mouse. All right, so that's it for our Week 9 recaps here. Let's get into our second segment, which there's been some you got one more thing?
It was Doug Martin. Doug Martin, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneer running back, was the muscle hamster. So maybe we can rebrand that onto Jarquez Hunter, because he's jacked up.
He absolutely is, and I love it, man. With he's already getting ready for the NFL with his pregame outfits, and they're super cool. Unlike Nico's, which he's wearing dresses and stuff, you got Jarquez Hunter, who comes out in like cowboy hats, cowboy boots, and like big old rodeo buckles. So I love Jarquez Hunter. So all right, we can get into our second segment now, which is there's a couple things that have happened this week that we wanted to touch on. And the first one is the SEC scheduling. So there was early this week, you had Lane Kiffin in his press conference, I believe it was on Monday. He was talking about the scheduling and kind of how things have panned out this year. And in previous years, just kind of how things, get scheduled each year based on the TV times. And he was expressing a lot of frustration with how Ole Miss doesn't get a home game at night this year when they're a ranked team, especially when they've got a game against Georgia that's coming up, and they should be. He thinks they should be the night game, and so he was frustrated. And then he was throwing shade at LSU, not saying that it was LSU's fault, but he was frustrated with the networks and with the SEC for continually giving LSU the night games. So he wasn't the only one, though, that was talking about this. It was also Mark Stoops, which I didn't look too hard into this, but I think you read a little bit more into what Stoops had to say.
Yeah, so I saw the comments from Kiffin. As you said, he was kind of, of course, LSU gets another night game, right? They always get night games, and we haven't had a night game all season, and that stinks for our fans, which it does. It stinks for Ole Miss fans that they aren't going to get a night game this year. And then I would like to say, I guess just out of left field, Mark Stoops in the SEC coaches teleconference earlier today also expressed some displeasure with the night game breakdown, because he chimed in and said that let me see if I can find the exact quote. Yeah, so this is opening his part of his opening statement in the teleconference today, complaining about Kentucky playing another night game. He says, I quote, Neyland Stadium is a very hostile environment. I think that's our fourth straight 8 o'clock Eastern game. Thank you for that. That's a lot of fun. And then the reporters, included there that he was being sarcastic. Mark Stoops, 2 of those games were in Lexington. So I don't know if somebody wants to let him know that playing night games at home is actually a good thing, but I'm not really sure what he was complaining about there. But it obviously is a topic of conversation among coaches that whatever, who gets night games, how they get them, when they get them, how all that breaks down. And some people are not thrilled.
Yeah, I think Mark Stoops has no leg to stand on. He's just complaining to complain at this point. He's frustrated with how the season's going, as we just talked about, and now he's just frustrated about everything. It doesn't matter. He's just going to start throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, and kind of, push the blame aside that, it's the SEC scheduling office because we continually are being scheduled for night games. Well, that's ridiculous. Alabama has been scheduled for night games. LSU has been scheduled for night games. Many of these different teams are South Carolina gets scheduled for a lot of night games. A lot of those teams win those night games, not always South Carolina, but the others win those night games. And a lot of teams want those night games because of the atmosphere that it creates. So to me, that's a Kentucky problem. That's a Mark Stoops problem. But I did go through and actually look into this because I wanted to see, the general thought out there is that, yes, LSU gets a lot of night games. Alabama gets a lot of night games. Georgia, right? Just because they're the preeminent teams in the SEC typically. So I did some research into it just to kind of see if what Lane Kiffin was saying actually had some merit. And honestly, I don't know if he does have any merit to what he's saying. So this is just a little breakdown of some of the SEC teams that are close to Ole Miss in record since 2020, and also some of the others like Alabama and Georgia, who are the outliers, who have won a ton of games and who also are, viewed as getting a lot of night games. So you can see the records here at the top. And then the second little column here is at night versus Power 4 teams through 2024. So from 2020 to 2024. So that includes, your USC versus LSU this year, those types of games. So Ole Miss has had 18. So they're on the lower end. You see like 29 to 30 because there could potentially be another night game later in the year. It's those flex games.
Mm-hmm.
And then the SEC night home games that they've had since 2020. Again, Ole Miss on the lower end. But hey, Alabama has 9 as well. Georgia's only had 5. The home night record, you can see down below. So it's obviously, for most of these teams, it is a serious advantage to have a night home game, which is obviously why Lane Kiffin is bartering for those and is trying to get the SEC office and ABC and ESPN to give him more night games. But if you look at this chart, I don't really see what leg he has to stand on. If teams they've got more than Tennessee, they've got more SEC night home games than Tennessee since 2020, and they're
Georgia,
right in there. They're right in there with like Texas A&M, who has a similar record to Ole Miss since 2020. So they've had a lower amount, but also you've had the same amount as Alabama since 2020. So, I think it's some recency bias here from Lane Kiffin and thinking that, LSU and Alabama and all the teams, okay, well, they're just giving him those games because they're LSU and Alabama and Georgia. Well, that's not the case. If you go look back, the chart I just showed you, he's kind of just blowing smoke. He's just being Lane Kiffin. He's complaining about something and he's trying to stir up dirt.
Yeah, probably so. Like you said, I think there's some recency bias there too, where he's bitter. They've got Georgia coming to town. It's a huge game for him and that program, and he would prefer that game to be at night for obvious reasons. And instead, they're getting the 3:30 slot, and LSU Bama in Death Valley gets the primetime night game slot. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of see where he's coming from, but when you show that graphic, it makes sense. And it seems like over time, it is probably pretty evenly spaced out, which I think is ultimately what the SEC would like it to be like. They don't want to, seem like they're giving favor to certain programs. Speaking of, we can talk a little bit about maybe now the Texas thing that obviously as Aggies we've been shouting at since the SEC schedule was released. But Matt Hayes of USA Today put out an article earlier this week on the Texas schedule and kind of some, we'll call it, back channel or underground backlash, perhaps, that he has heard from other SEC athletic department folks and even some coaches, actually, who are just not really thrilled that Texas' first SEC road game was not until October 26th, and it was at Vanderbilt, which Nick Saban famously dubbed as the only easy road environment in the SEC before Alabama obviously fell. However, I think we can all agree, Vandy, wonderful story, very improved on the field this year. They still don't have a very hostile home environment. It's not a great, home field advantage, especially when stacked up against some of the other home field advantages across the SEC. So I just thought that was interesting, again, because as A&M fans, we've been screaming that from the rooftops that Texas got an easy schedule to start the SEC. But I was just a little bit surprised to see some actual, people in the know, in the business, even other coaches were like, hey, this is kind of crazy. What did you think about that article? Did you have any takeaways?
Yeah, I would encourage people to go read the article. It was a great article. So Matt Hayes, he's been a longtime writer in college football. If you don't know him, wrote for Saturday Down South for a long time, and now he's with USA Today. So you can just go Google search Matt Hayes and find his most recent article. But it was interesting to me that, the article was pretty hostile and pretty like, hey, people have been saying this about Texas and the Big 12 for years and years, that they're very arrogant and that they come in and they try to control everything. And so it seems like, from the get-go, that's actually kind of what SEC folks are finding out. And in the article, Matt Hayes talks about how, SEC coaches and ADs all saw this. When the schedules came out, everyone kind of took a look and looked at Texas and was like, did the SEC give Texas an easy route to the playoff? Not just this year, but also next year. Because remember, because
the schedule repeats.
Right, the scheduling is going to work. It's repeats and it just flips, right? So we can check out Texas' schedule here now. But, yeah, so you're looking at the schedule again, like you said, not a true SEC road game until Vanderbilt, October 26th. And then you get Georgia at home, you get Florida at home. Your only really tough game, and it's not Texas's fault, right, that Michigan ended up not being that good, but or Oklahoma for that matter. But your only real like serious road game is at Texas A&M, and that's going to be a difficult one without a doubt. But yeah, my takeaway from that article really was just that Texas already kind of wearing out their welcome, and that coaches, there were multiple coaches that texted Kirby Smart after they beat Texas in Austin by 15 points, telling him, "Hey, thanks for doing that. Like, screw those guys." Yeah, it is kind of a fascinating dynamic that's starting to take place in the SEC with Texas already starting to ruffle feathers.
Right. I would agree. And we'll see. I mean, yeah, who knows? I don't know what goes into making the schedule, but it does seem like whether warranted or not, Texas is possibly, not making any friends. Let's just put it that way. Whether they, did some kind of backdoor deal, we'll never know. But the optics don't look good, which is what I think that article helped explain. Speaking of Texas, their schedule, the rest of their schedule, SEC title race. We want to get into that before we touch on the Week 10 games. So we'll keep moving right along here. A&M, by beating LSU, is firmly in the driver's seat. They are 6-0. Squarely behind them, Texas at 5-1, Georgia at 5-1. Odds markets still have Texas and Georgia favored to meet in Atlanta. A&M, I believe, is the third favorite to make the SEC title game. Any thoughts maybe on those big three? Like, I don't know. I guess we don't need to spend too much time on this, but just SEC title race thoughts as it stands today with those three kind of being the main point of focus. You're muted.
I'm back. Sorry, I had to cough.
There he is.
It's shaping up to be a fun race to the finish. I'm really excited to watch the stretch run here, especially with A&M. If A&M, and we can look at their schedule here real quick. But if A&M, if I can find it, where is it? Here it is. So A&M, you got South Carolina this week, which we'll touch on that game a little bit later. Obviously, the Aggies are favored. The Aggies will be favored in every single game except for probably Texas. So if you get to that Texas game at 10-1, and Texas, wins the rest of their games and are sitting at 10-1, that is going to determine who goes to the SEC championship game. And so that will be fascinating. I hope it gets to that. If people haven't seen this online or on Twitter, the tickets for that game are already the cost of, a European vacation, and they may already, continue to go up. So if you want to go to that game, get your tickets while you can, because Drake and, Johnny Manziel and every other celebrity under the sun, Matthew McConaughey, is going to be there. But yeah, the stretch run is going to be a lot of fun. You also have, Alabama still in the hunt. They're not dead. LSU still in the hunt. Not dead. Ole Miss 4-2, not dead. So they need some help. And Tennessee, right. Tennessee's 5-1. Tennessee needs Texas to lose. Otherwise, it's going to be a tiebreaker. So it really feels like it's shaping up to be a tiebreaker year in the first year of this, no East or West, which is going to be fun to see how that plays out.
I agree. I think you will see a tiebreaker, and I think we can move on from this because there's going to be a tiebreaker in there, right? Because Georgia plays, they still have Ole Miss and Tennessee left. Alabama has LSU left. Like A&M has Texas left. There's so many teams that play each other that those games, coupled with, like you said, some just landmine games, right? Texas goes to Arkansas. A&M's going to South Carolina this weekend. They go to Auburn. So the combination of the teams that are still in the hunt having to play each other and the landmine games that remain for all of those teams, kind of other than Texas, but anyway, it's likely we're going to see a tiebreaker scenario, which is not my favorite thing in the world, but is just the new reality in college football when you have in the SEC and the Big Ten. And I think it works. I think every conference, if I'm not mistaken, just kind of did away with divisions. So this is how it's going to work. We're going to have to get used to it, and we'll see how it plays out. We'll see how it impacts, the playoff race, because as we've talked about, we don't need to get into it here, but if you're kind of in the playoff, but you don't play in your conference title game, you just basically get a bye, then you get to host a playoff game. So very interested to see how all this plays out. But I'm ready to get to week 10. How about you?
Let's get it. Yep. I'm in. So first game we got here, Ole Miss, Arkansas. Can Arkansas get Ole Miss? You got another one in Fayetteville. Arkansas had a very favorable schedule. They had a tough schedule this year, but a favorable one in terms of who they got in Fayetteville. And you get another one. You get Ole Miss coming to town. I think it's a very winnable game for Arkansas. What are you looking at in this one?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, here's Arkansas's schedule, right? They got Tennessee at home, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, Texas at home. So definitely, if you are a Razorback season ticket holder, this has probably been the best slate of games you've seen in quite some time in Reynolds Razorback Stadium. But in terms of the game, man, kind of what I talked about. I want to see more from the Ole Miss offense. I think even LSU ran the ball decently well on Arkansas. I mean, Arkansas's defense, I don't really know what to make of them. But LSU had their best day on the ground against Arkansas 2 weeks ago. So I would like to see Ole Miss get something going on the ground. And on the flip side, I think the Ole Miss defense can clamp them down. I know they had a great week last week, the Razorbacks, that is, but Ole Miss defense is playing very, very good. And their defensive line, their front seven with Suntory Perkins and Walter Nolan and Jared Ivey, Prince Uman Yami. Yeah. They're really good. And Taylor Green is talented. He seems healthy. That was kind of a question I know going into the LSU game. He was, beat up, questionable, didn't play well, and then all of a sudden he's Superman last week. So I'm going to assume he's healthy, but can they protect him against Ole Miss? I'm not sure. So obviously we will do our official picks coming up on SEC After Dark at 9 p.m. Eastern. So I won't give away who I'm taking to win and cover here, I suppose. But I do like Ole Miss matchup-wise in this game. I think they'll be able to frustrate Arkansas's offense. And although I'm again still waiting to see more from the Ole Miss offense, I think they can score enough in this game. But definitely a landmine for the Rebels.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason, right, that the spread is only 6.5 on this game. And it's because it's in Fayetteville, and it's also because of Ole Miss's offense, like we talked about earlier in the show. Everyone's been waiting. They've got all these weapons. You got Jackson Dart, in his third year. Like, it's supposed to be much better now than it has been. And the fact that Arkansas's offense has showed the offensive explosion last week, and they've played pretty well in multiple games this year. So there is definitely a world where Arkansas can keep up with Ole Miss as long as they can, clamp down on defense and also be able to protect Taylor Green, like you talked about, get a little bit of the running game going and get a couple of shot plays. I mean, I could easily see this game, being somewhere in like the 28-24 range or something like that. So especially in Fayetteville at night. So Arkansas definitely has a great shot in this game. I'm with you as well on Ole Miss's defense against Arkansas. Arkansas allows over 2 sacks a game, and they allow around 5.5 tackles for loss a game. We just saw what Ole Miss did to Oklahoma's offensive line. I don't think that Ole Miss's offensive line is as bad as Oklahoma's, but they're also not that good. Jackson Dart's been under duress a lot this year. So I could certainly see this game being close.
Yeah, I just flashed up the Ole Miss schedule. I was just going to add one more thing before we move on, but if Ole Miss hadn't already lost twice this year, I could see this game, right, being sort of a classic. All right, we got a look-ahead game coming up because it's an early morning, 11 a.m. start time in Fayetteville the week before Ole Miss gets Georgia. But Ole Miss has already lost twice. Their margin for error is gone. I don't think they will be overlooking Arkansas, so I expect them to come ready to play. Speaking of coming ready to play, you alluded to it earlier. Diego Pavia goes back to Jordan-Hare to take on Auburn and Hugh Freeze. This will be – I saw a good quote from Hugh earlier this week where he just said he's tired of seeing this kid because he played him at Liberty when he was on New Mexico State. He took the job at Auburn, New Mexico State, came into Jordan-Hare, beat him. So this is, I think, the third, maybe even fourth time, but I believe it's just the third time that Hugh Freeze has gone up against Diego Pavia. So he's not excited for this one. I would not be either as a coach. But what are your thoughts on Vandy heading to Jordan-Hare?
Look, I think it's going to be a really interesting game. I think these teams are, crazy enough to say it, like on the level this year. Talent-wise, Auburn has a better roster, right? If you look in terms of the blue chip ratio, or you look in terms of the recruiting classes that they've brought in over the last couple of years and compare that to Vanderbilt, it's obvious who has the more talented roster. However, this is one of those matchups where coaching matters. And they say that all the time in college football. You can look at it across Kurt Cignetti at Indiana right now, right? Like Indiana is not that good. They fired their coach last year, and Kurt Cignetti comes in, and boom, these guys are in the top 15 and undefeated and look like they could potentially beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten. So coaching really matters, especially in college football. And Clark Lee is a really good coach. And Hugh Freeze right now, I don't know. I don't know if he is a really good coach, frankly. So the coaching is going to matter in this game. I frankly like Clark Lee if I'm picking, and with Diego Pavia, who's already got a win in Jordan-Hare, to really go in there and give it a real shot to win. I think the fact that it is in Jordan-Hare and the fact that Hugh Freeze has seen Diego Pavia before and knows of the magic that he can spin, maybe Auburn can get him. So it's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be super close. I really don't expect either of these teams to pull away. I think it's going to be a dogfight from start to finish.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think it's definitely going to be a dogfight. This game, to me, because of what you just laid out there in terms of the matchup, kind of comes down, as many of the games have this year for Auburn in particular, but really anybody. But it comes down to turnovers, right? I mean, they took care of the ball for the most part last week. Auburn did. Can they take care of it again this week? Do they give Jarquez Hunter the ball enough? I think if they do, they'll be able to score. But I'm with you. I trust Diego Pavia to be able to score here too. I think this game probably kind of similar to the Texas game, somewhere in the 20s. And, hey, a 5.5 point spread. Does anybody trust Auburn with a 5.5 point spread? I don't know. So very, very interesting game. I'm excited to see how that one plays out.
One more thing I'll add on that game is that folks should just remember Vanderbilt causes turnovers. They've got, on the year, they've got 8 interceptions and 2 fumble recoveries. So they're tied for third in the SEC in turnovers. So watch out for that one. Auburn loves to give the ball away to the other team, and Vanderbilt is really good at taking the ball away. So if Vanderbilt can get a couple of turnovers, watch out.
Yeah, good call out there. How about the big party, world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville, Florida, taking on number 2, Georgia. I think Georgia's 17.5 point favorite last I saw. I guess coming into this game, the thing I'm looking at is kind of like, is this Florida resurgence the real deal? I don't know. Resurgence almost sounds wrong because I'm maybe still not fully on board, but they've looked a lot better, since their bye week, their first bye week, they earlier in the year. And this is obviously a massive, massive test. So what are you looking for in this one?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm curious to see if Florida can keep this momentum up and keep this momentum going. I'm not sold that they can necessarily against Georgia. If they do, DJ Lagway is going to have a great game, and I don't really see it, especially because of Georgia's defense. What we saw them do to Texas, I think the Georgia defense has figured it out. They're not sleepwalking like they were against Mississippi State. They got right against Texas, and they figured a lot of things out. And those guys were flying around the ball. They were hitting hard. That looked like the Georgia defense that we expected to see this year, and that we've seen in years past under Kirby Smart. So I think this defense is going to be ready to play. And I think, especially with a young quarterback, DJ Lagway has got a lot of talent. We've talked about that kid. He's the future of Florida football, or potentially of Texas A&M football. So if DJ Lagway does stick around at Florida, that's a joke, everybody. But Billy Napier, if he ends up being the coach still, I think DJ Lagway will be at Florida. But he's the future there. But right now, he's still a super young quarterback. He's a freshman. He's a true freshman. So Kirby Smart is licking his chops watching tape of a young quarterback like that. He's going to be bringing pressure. He's going to be disguising pressures all night. So I'm just a little bit worried about DJ Lagway coming into this spot. I think it's going to be pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I could totally see that. I mean, I think for this game, what I'm really, really interested in seeing is, we'll start with Florida. You hit on it, DJ Lagway, because when you look at, Georgia's schedule here, what they did to Texas and Quinn Ewers was very, very impressive. But Quinn Ewers is not a factor with his legs. Michael Van Buren can run around a little bit. Jalen Milroe can run around a little bit, and they gave up more points to those two teams. So I'm interested to see if Billy Napier and Lagway can kind of mirror some of what we saw Alabama and Mississippi State do. Probably more so Mississippi State, because Florida does not have a Ryan Williams, so it'd be very difficult to mimic what Alabama did. But I do think that adds another element where, in that Texas game, Georgia was just pinning their ears back and coming after them, and perhaps DJ Lagway could make them pay with his legs at times. So I'm interested to see that. And then for Georgia, look, they're back up to number 2 in the country. I think they're odds-on favorite to win the SEC at this point. Their offense has got to improve, though. Whether it's winning the SEC or winning the playoff, Carson Beck's got to find it. I think we saw something. I know we saw something with Trevor Etienne in the Texas game. This is his former school, so I think they're going to feed him and give him a healthy workload in this game, as they should. But I got to see something from Carson Beck and that wide receiver core in this game, because Florida is a defense that is vulnerable, as we've seen this year. So Georgia's got to show me something on offense here in, a rivalry game. Emotions will be high. Florida will be ready. They're going to bring it. I don't know exactly how much, how many rounds they have in the clip, but they're going to bring whatever they have. And Georgia just has to be ready. They have to be crisp on offense if they're truly the SEC favorite.
Yeah, without a doubt. All right, let's get to Kentucky and Tennessee first, and then we'll touch on A&M and South Carolina quickly, as we're going to run over time again. But hey, free football for everybody, man. We just keep doing this. Free football here at Biscuits and SEC every week. But so give me your thoughts here on Kentucky going to Neyland with Tennessee. I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time on this one.
No, I think, as I said before, Kentucky to me is kind of on quit watch. I'm not really sure how locked in this team is. Their offense has looked completely out of sorts. Tennessee's defense is excellent. In Neyland at night, I really struggle to see how Kentucky can score. Similar to what I just said about Georgia from the Tennessee side, although I don't think they'll have too much trouble with Kentucky overall. I would love to see some more from Nico, right? What can the Tennessee offense do? Kentucky's defense pretty dang vulnerable. Florida just put up 48. Auburn put up 24. So not only do we need to see Dylan Sampson, I'm sure he's going to get a ton of carries and he's probably going to have quite a bit of yards, but let's see what Nico can do. If there's ever a game to maybe be a little bit more risky, this would be it, because I don't think Kentucky's going to score very much.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to our final game of the weekend. It is number 10 Texas A&M going to South Carolina, Williams-Brice at night. Atmosphere should be electric. These teams over the past couple of years, I believe, have split the game. So it's going to be an interesting one. I have been telling people all week. I keep getting calls from friends who are telling me, "Oh, A&M's great. A&M's so good. Wow, this is Aggies look really good. What are you thinking?" And I keep telling them I have watched Aggie football for my entire life, and every time that something like this happens, I want the national media to act like we don't exist and to stop talking about us, because we always trip up somewhere where we're not supposed to. And this one feels like one of those games where that could potentially happen, because South Carolina is not a bad football team. They have a really good defense. They've got a really good defensive line. And Williams-Brice at night is not an easy place to play. They really bring it. The fans do there in South Carolina. So I think it's going to be a really interesting game. The big thing to me, and I'll pull up South Carolina's schedule here. So South Carolina, if I can find it, I can't find the dang thing anyway.
I'll pull it up.
Okay, find it for me. But anyway, South Carolina, they have not faced a quarterback like Marcel Reed, right? So you look here, you got Brock Vandegrift, you got Garrett Nussmeier, you got Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe a little bit, right? He's a little bit like a Marcel Reed type.
Yeah.
But that's really the only one that they have faced. And they did a pretty good job of bottling up Jalen Milroe for the most part.
Yeah, they frustrated him.
They frustrated him. But Marcel Reed seems to be a different beast. Reed the Steed, baby. So can Marcel Reed do what we saw against LSU? And we talked about it earlier in the show. He's going to need to come back and really show that he could throw the ball too, because teams are going to start to try to take away the RPO. They're going to try to take away the run. And South Carolina really could do a good job of that because of their defensive line. So I'm really interested in that and what South Carolina can do against Marcel Reed. The defensive lines for both of these teams are really, really good. So I'm expecting both quarterbacks to be under duress all night. The big thing to me in this one, though, is the fact that A&M has the 6th best scoring defense in the SEC, and South Carolina's got the 11th best scoring offense. I'm just a little worried that South Carolina doesn't have enough in the tank offensively to do enough to get past this A&M team.
Yeah. On the same page. I think this game to me comes down to early on, how does A&M start the game? Mostly just take care of the ball early. Don't give South Carolina any gimmies early on, because the age-old football adage is defense travels, right? So I think from an A&M perspective, you're not – it's going to be Reed. I would be shocked if it's not. But, we've seen a handful of his games so far, and he hasn't turned the ball over. He's not lit up the scoreboard except for this last week against LSU. But, their teams have stopped him, right? We scored 21 on Arkansas. So I'm not expecting what we saw against LSU to just happen the rest of the season. I think that would be naive, especially when a team has a full week to game plan for him and the offense and how it operates with him at QB. So, yeah, I think they just need to withstand the early storm from South Carolina with the crowd, the defensive line getting after it. Just don't turn the ball over. Even if you're not moving the ball, just don't turn the ball over. Don't give South Carolina any short field, defensive score, even a special team score. Because as you said, South Carolina, to me, offensively, is not going to get much in this game. I think the Aggie defense is ready. They will be ready. They've been ready all season. And South Carolina's offense is just not good. I mean, I'm sorry, but you look at all their games, especially the ones that they've won in blowout fashion against Kentucky and Oklahoma, they had multiple, or at least one in the Oklahoma game, they had multiple, defensive touchdowns, right? Or short fields. That is not an offense that can drive the ball down the field on a, 7, 8, 10, 12 play drive. They just don't execute that well. They don't block that well on the offensive line. Lenora Sellers is kind of hit or miss in the pocket. So A&M, you can't turn the ball over. You cannot give them anything that's going to keep the crowd into it or that's going to make their offense, operating in an advantageous situation. And I think, that's how A&M escapes with a win. But there's a reason this point spread is under 3 points, because Marcel Reed hasn't turned the ball over yet. He's still a freshman. This is going to be a night game in Williams-Brice. It's going to be rocking. So I think, this is going to be a slugfest where you're going to see some great defenses squaring off. You're going to see great defensive line play, and it's just going to be a matter of, who can edge out the other physically and who can take care of the ball.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's going to be a really fun one to watch. Another great atmosphere in the SEC at night. You can bet that we will be tuned in. All right, well, we can move on. That's it for week 10. So we'll get into our final two segments that we do every single week here at Biscuits and SEC Live. First of all, we got the Muschamp Coach of the Week. So if you guys are new here, every week we do the Muschamp Coach of the Week. It's an ode to Will Muschamp. We love Coach Muschamp. We're not throwing shade at him. We're not making fun of him. Coach Muschamp always brings the passion, always brings the fire. He's punching whiteboards. He's in guys' face on the sideline. He's yelling at referees. He has always brought the passion, which we love. So every week we honor a coach who brought the passion or who blew up at a ref. Or last week we highlighted the FSU fan who wore the Xbox headset and was yelling at fans, turning around on the sideline, had his shirt off. It was like Jim Harbaugh wearing the khakis with his shirt off. So we just like to highlight somebody each week who brought the passion, who blew up at a referee, who blew up at a coach, or something like that. So I'll let you take it away with who the Muschamp Coach of the Week is for week 9.
Yeah, I think maybe I was missing something. I didn't see too many blow-ups on the sideline this week, with the exception of someone who's always seems like he's on the razor's thin edge of a blow-up, especially at his own team, and that is our good friend Brian Kelly, who after the mishap on the field goal where the holder was not looking, snap comes early, hits him in the chest, and they fumble and don't get a chance. Of course, Brian Kelly is over there lighting or laying into the holder, dropping F-bombs. It gets picked up on a hot mic over the broadcast, goes over the air. Kirk Herbstreit kind of has to cover and say, "Oh yeah, we gotta get organized," trying to cover up for Kelly screaming at his guy. But as you said, that's just Brian Kelly for you. He was screaming at Nussmeier later after an interception. I love when he screams. He gets so red, and it fit better when he was the Notre Dame guy, kind of just like a pissed off, red faced leprechaun. It's doesn't quite fit it doesn't quite fit as well in Baton Rouge when he's got his he has dry fit LSU polo on or whatever. But shout out to Brian Kelly for screaming and dropping F-bombs at his holder, who was not even looking when the snap came. So I don't even know if that was his fault.
I don't think it was his fault. But yeah, hopefully it's some consolation for Brian Kelly winning the Muschamp Coach of the Week award. I did see that he addressed it. He addressed the viral clip of him dropping F-bombs and lighting up his placeholder. But he addressed it by not really addressing it and did not apologize for it one bit, which I love, actually. Like,
right.
Good for him for not apologizing for it at all. That's coaching. So be it. If you want to come to LSU, we're going to coach you hard. And he kind of doubled down. He said, also, by the way, he said, this is just how it is, and all of our guys are capable. But if this was the NFL, we would have just gone and got a new placeholder and a long snapper because that's how they do it in the NFL. They have a bank of people who can do this, but this is the college game, so our guys are capable, so we'll get it right. It's kind of a backhanded way of saying that it was his long snapper and placeholder's fault, as well as his kicker up to that point had been really good this year and then misses 2. So again, that goes to the Kyle Field crowd that we talked about earlier in the show.
Yeah, that's the backstory or sort of undercurrent of all this to me is good snap, good hold. That kid is not making that kick. I mean, his first 2 kicks were not close. I don't think that kid was making that kick either way, but turned out to be a lot funnier for us as Aggies and for the rest of the world as we got to see Brian Kelly get all upset about it and drop F-bombs on ESPN or ABC.
Yeah, and that like you said, that wasn't an easy kick. It was on the right hash, and I think it was like a 40-yarder or something like that, 37.
Yeah, it was 40 plus, I believe.
Right-footed kicker, right hash, across your body, not an easy kick. So,
no.
All right, well, let's move into our final segment here. Every week we feature a biscuit of the week. We are Biscuits and SEC, which really we chose that name because we love SEC football. We love covering the SEC basketball, SEC baseball, all the SEC sports. But we also love Southern culture, and we love the SEC footprint and everything that brings. And obviously, biscuits are a huge piece of Southern culture and Southern cuisine. So each week we like to feature a biscuit that we enjoyed this week, and we would also love your submissions. So if you have a biscuit that you ate at your local diner, if you had one that you ate at a local food truck, or that you just enjoy or that you made from scratch, we would love to see them. So send us a picture, DM us at Biscuits and SEC. You can DM us on Instagram or on Twitter with your pictures, and we would love to feature your biscuit on the show. So this week, Hammer and I are back home visiting family. So we are in Charlottesville, Virginia, where our parents live. And there's a place right up the road called Brownsville Market. And they make fantastic biscuits. You can get a sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit. You can get a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit. This right here is a spicy chicken biscuit filet that I got, kind of like your Bojangles special, except homemade. Right there at the Brownsville Market. So we hit the links on Saturday morning just before the game started. So we dropped by Brownsville Market real quick before our tea time and had some awesome biscuits. I might be going back this weekend to Brownsville Market before our games start for week 10. So anyway, please do send us your submissions. And that's going to do it here for us on Biscuits and SEC Live for week 9, our 5th show. Thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it. We really enjoy having you guys on. Make sure to comment on our next shows. We enjoy the interaction with you guys as well. Be sure to follow us at Biscuits and SEC, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And please do go and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can find us at Biscuits and SEC, and make sure to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss an episode. We will be on Wednesdays at 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central, now until through the end of the season, through bowl season. And then we also will be on SEC After Dark coming up here in about 15 minutes. So make sure to tune in to that as well. So thank you guys again for joining us. For Hammer, I am Bossman. Enjoy your week 10. And enjoy your weekend, and we will see you guys back here next week on Wednesday.
Yep. Appreciate y'all.